Really excited for our session this morning with SHRM-Atlanta and talking about talent acquisition. I think it's no surprise that workforce and talent continues to be a huge topic that everyone is interested in talking about. So we're so excited to have our experts with us this morning. A special thanks to all of our anchor investors. You can see them here on the screen. If you know individuals in these organizations, please tell them thank you for supporting Max, supporting workforce development in our state. We really couldn't do our programming without these anchor investors. That's a little preview. So without any further ado, I'll turn it over to Samira Luther with SHRM-Atlanta to introduce our featured guest this morning. But again, we're really excited to have SHRM with us and talk more about talent acquisition. So Samira, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So good morning, everybody. My name is Samira Luther. I serve as SHRM-Atlanta's Manager of Events and Emerging Content. We are really excited to be here with you all today to talk about talent acquisition and the trends that are happening right now. But before we really jump in, I wanted to take a couple of minutes just to talk about SHRM-Atlanta, who we are, and the work that we're doing in the Atlanta community. SHRM-Atlanta is a chapter of a national organization called SHRM. SHRM stands for the Society for Human Resource Management, and there are almost 600 chapters across the nation. Atlanta is considered a super mega chapter, which just means we have a lot of members and we're one of the largest chapters in the nation. Because our chapter is so large, we have lots of volunteers, but we also have full-time staff who serve the Atlanta community and really work towards helping us achieve our 4 pillars of fostering community, promoting professional development, celebrating excellence in HR, and advancing thought leadership. We try to do this in order to reach our mission and vision, which is to shape the Atlanta workforce and workplace and develop HR professionals who transform their organizations and community. So when thinking about who we are and how we're related to Max, we like to think of it as SHRM-Atlanta is the demand and Max is the supplier. So if you would like any more information on SHRM-Atlanta and our organization, please feel free to reach out to me. I have my email listed at the bottom of the page. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Teela Jackson. So Teela is a relational connector who is passionate about talent and the role people play in an organization's success. She is the Vice President, HR Search with the recruitment solutions firm Talent Connections, LLC. She leads the HR search practice and partners with organizations to engage and recruit top human resources and talent acquisition professionals. Teela has been a member of SHRM-Atlanta for over 10 years, where she has served as a member of the board and has served as president. Because of her commitment to the organization and profession, Teela has been awarded the SHRM-Atlanta Presidential Leadership Award and the SHRM Georgia State Council Volunteer of the Year, Georgia Peach Award. Outside of her work in SHRM-Atlanta, Teela is an active volunteer in the community and has volunteered with the Crossroads Career Network, Atlanta Center for Self-Sufficiency, Habitat for Humanity, and foster children organizations. Teela earned a Master's of Business Administration degree in management from Mercer University and a Bachelor of Science degree in Business Administration with an emphasis in human resources from the University of Tennessee at Martin. So please join me in welcoming Teela Jackson.
Well, hello, everyone, and good morning. Thank you so much for joining. I'm thrilled to be here and partner with SHRM-Atlanta to provide some presentation and information to you this morning on job trends and sort of what's happening out there and what will be happening at the beginning of 2023. So I will go ahead and start sharing my screen. See here. All right, so hopefully you can see my presentation now. Again, thrilled to be here with you and join. Excited to talk about what's happening in the job market. My goodness, there's a lot happening. Maybe not in everyone's favor per se, but a lot going on in terms of just what's happening out there, the climate, the touch points that we have just to get talent have increased certainly, and the way that we go about getting talent is very different. So I'll hop in by talking a little bit about just kind of the general state of hiring. Right now, our unemployment rate, as you all probably saw, is 2.9. It's not the lowest. The lowest was in September. But I will say, comparatively speaking, I remember doing a presentation similar to this one in November of 2019, and the unemployment rate was 4%, and that was a record low. So just to kind of give you a comparison, I think we always compare sort of pre-pandemic versus where we are today in this new normal. It is very, very low. And about 3,200 jobs were added just this Wednesday, like in one day in Georgia. These are Georgia numbers specifically. Georgia also is experiencing the 9th most employment growth in the US. And so I think we all see that, by the way, that it's just more challenging to get talent. Our market is growing. Thankfully, I just read a headline in the AJC this morning as I was reading the paper electronically, of course, and it said that Atlanta is still outpacing sort of the lull that's happening in other cities in job growth. In terms of the Georgia market trends, there are about 30,000 healthcare jobs that are posted right now, which is astronomical. I don't even think I have 5 healthcare professionals in my subdivision. So the fact that they need to find 30,000 is quite a bit. Comparative to that, retail is about 16,000. I was just talking to a friend of mine who works at Carter's last night, the night before. We were sort of talking about job trends, and retail is really suffering right now. And I keep saying it's the industries that are the foundation of America, the front lines that are doing the work out there on a day-to-day basis and in person. Those are the areas where there's a lot of job growth, but not enough talent. Hospitality and accommodation is experiencing growth. Food services, and the 2 areas that we're seeing really rise to the top just from a general job growth perspective. Healthcare, there are a lot of jobs posted, but job growth is happening in arts, entertainment, and travel, as well as in finance and insurance specifically. So I do like to talk a little bit about the executive disconnect. There's a little bit of a disconnect that's happening in general with executives out there, because I think we all are hearing the R word, is what I call it, which of course is recession. We're outpacing that recession right now in Georgia. But I do think there's a little bit of a disconnect in that executives are seeing the headlines and thinking, oh, well, there's more talent. Now we can get back to normal. Guys, get out there and hire. But there is still, frankly, a candidate-driven market out there. There's still more jobs that are available than we have candidates to supply, at least for now. We do see that going into probably about 6 months of 2023. So the first half of 2023 will look, frankly, very similar to what we're experiencing right now. I know that many of you probably would like to hear something different, and that things will turn. We are hearing about layoffs in the tech sector and other sectors specifically, but in general, the market is still growing and there's still not enough jobs to fulfill that talent. So let's look at talent trends next. In general, one size does not fit all. In years past, we've been able to sort of hire the same way, create similar process to hire. And that's not the case anymore. So what some of your job seekers and people that you may coach or train are seeing in the market is that processes look very different today than they looked, 5 years ago, which seems like yesterday for most of us. The post and hope for companies is no longer a strategy. So it used to be easy to post a job, have qualified candidates apply. I think much of what companies are seeing right now, and employers and our firm even, we're seeing that if you do post a job, the candidates that apply aren't necessarily qualified for the role. So you have a lesser percentage that meet the qualifications for the role. And I think that's a big theme of this job market in general, is that it seems like people are saying, oh, people don't want to work. Well, they do want to work. Oftentimes they don't have all of the requirements for a role. And so companies are exploring how they can be more creative just with their hiring strategy, with the requirements for the role. They're sort of lowering that a little bit to get people in and train, do a combination of getting experience and combining that with training. So we're seeing that quite a bit. Recruiting these days is outbound for most companies. So again, post and hope is not a strategy. That's sort of what I call it. Recruiting being outbound now means that companies are actually going out there to say, where is the talent? How do we find the talent, whether it's on an Indeed job board or a monster job board, or whether it's on a industry specific job board or a chamber job community that we're finding talent, or frankly, much of it is through referrals. I think companies, interestingly enough, aren't leveraging the referral lever as much as they should. And so those things still work, right? Companies are hiring people that know great people. So, while people may be busier at work and may not have as much of an opportunity to share opportunities with their friends or to pass their resume along, we have to get back that muscle moving again so that we're helping our friends and colleagues find jobs and opportunities. Recruiting now is very data-driven. So if you are talking to talent, one key is that most companies are using a system to help them qualify talent. It's not a black hole, as most people say, but the systems do allow us and help us to stack rank talent based on how they meet the requirements through artificial intelligence. So that's the piece that's very prevalent and prominent. And it's sort of going back to that when, I keep saying what's old is new, because when job seekers used to look for an opportunity, they would put keywords on their resume. We have to go back to that because it's very data driven. Companies are also diversifying their strategy as far as acquiring talent. So they're looking at their internal talent pools. They're partnering with, agencies or staffing agencies. They're partnering with RPO companies for more of those high volume, similar roles that they're recruiting for. And then there's also, again, that internal talent pool. And it goes back to that, build, buy, bridge, or borrow. We used to say build, buy, borrow. Now there's bridge. And bridge is, do we help the talent that's internal bridge to that next role? Or do we help them bridge out of the company to their next role? So I think companies are looking at how do we, this exact strategy as they move forward with their talent for 2023. This is a funny picture of an actual restaurant that I went to that had this sign outside, and it's not untrue. So, companies in terms of other talent acquisition trends are looking to screen talent in versus screening out. So I think that's a muscle that, unfortunately, many companies in the past have looked at resumes and said, no, no, no. They're quicker to say no than yes. And so now companies are retraining that muscle in their hiring managers, in their recruiting team, in their executive team to say, how can we look at this as screening them in versus screening them out? I think that's a real key mind shift that has to happen in a market like this. Companies are also looking at how can they speed up time to offer. So how can they increase, speed up that time between talking to a candidate on the phone or meeting them in person or them coming to apply to their facility, from saying hello to join us. So we're looking at minimizing the amount of interviews that are part of the process, taking away unnecessary steps. I think that's a big key for this time period is if the step is unnecessary, if you think it's a nice to have, we have to eliminate that step and keep moving because the talent is moving on and off the market so quickly. Compensation bands and grades is something that many companies are reviewing right now. At the beginning of the pandemic, people were just tossing money at talent to say, oh, I've got to have this experience and we're going to pay a premium for it. And I think in 2023, we'll pull back a little bit and say, okay, what justifies us paying this person at the top of the salary range versus just sort of tossing money at people to get them because they have 3 offers and we're competing for offers. So some tough decisions will start happening around that in 2023 because we all have to start restraining our budgets a little bit. And it could start there, seriously. Of course, I've mentioned it's a very competitive landscape, extremely competitive landscape out there for talent, right? So if talent is interviewing for a role, the more and more we can equip them to present themselves better at that next step. So if you are the initial interviewer for someone, you've talked to them about a role and you think they'd be great, but maybe they're missing this, or maybe they didn't present this information to you, help them for that next role and share that feedback with them as much as you can. I know in high volume recruiting, you can't do that as much. But if it's a small company and you're hiring, 20 people this year, then I think you can help that person and say, the one thing that was missing in this interview is X. You'll probably want to prepare that in terms of coaching them, prepare that for the next step. The more we can do that, the more we help ourselves really, if they really have that experience and are able to share it. Diversity, equity, and inclusion will always be at the forefront. We're grateful to live in a beautiful city like Atlanta that is really diverse. Companies are taking that into account when looking at talent. Sure, they want to hire the best person for the role, but that starts with ensuring on the front end that your slate of candidates is diverse. And I know that's a tough sell in this market because I think it's a meaningful sell, but it's a tough one in this market when it's just hard to get people in general. I keep saying what's old is new. So in terms of employers and the activity that they have around hiring key talent, I was just talking to one of my best friends who's a chief human resources officer, and her company recently opened an office in the West Metro area. They were looking for talent and putting it out on Indeed and Monster and all the job boards, which is what many of us default to these days, especially HR professionals. And her CEO came to her and said, let's try an ad in the paper. And she about laughed out and fell out of her chair when he said that. But she did. She put it in the paper and also in the magazines that go in like a Huddle House or a IHOP. So they advertised their opening. They were moving an office to West Metro, and it was more rural West Metro versus city West Metro, not West Atlanta, but West Metro. So they actually were able to fill all of their roles. So they put an ad in the paper. They had a hiring spree. They were able to hire about 30 of the 40 people they needed for those roles through a newspaper and a community paper ad, which was just interesting to see that work. That those roles were call center positions, as well as like claims and customer service types of roles, but it worked for them and worked really well. So let's talk about the good stuff, the Jobseeker Trends. In terms of Jobseeker Trends, one, everybody's wondering, where are the job seekers? And then the job seekers are saying, where are the jobs? Like, I'm not getting calls, or I'm getting calls and I'm not making it through the process. It's a strange push and pull that's happening right now. But what we're finding is most companies are still finding people through internal referrals, through job boards like Indeed. ZipRecruiter is another big one that companies are having success with, as well as Monster and Career Builder. But if I were to tell, talent where to start, let's say Indeed and ZipRecruiter are the two that most companies are using these days in terms of job boards. And then also, in this pandemic, we've lost this sense of just communicating the fact that we're looking for a job. I see some of my friends look and suddenly they change jobs. And I'm like, wait, they never told me they were looking. So as much as we can share with people, you still send those emails to say, hey, I'm looking for a job, or make those phone calls to your family to say, hey, if you know anybody that's hiring, please let me know, because people are very much finding roles. So the number one source of hire is still referrals, and leveraging that is key, whether it's through community contacts or your family. Communication for companies and job seekers is key. I think that's one thing that I've heard from many of my colleagues who are, managers in companies, is that somewhere in this market, people are getting knocked out because of the competitive landscape due to lack of communication skills. And, I always think there's an introvert effect that's out there too right now. And I believe we have to see past people's sort of exuberance to communicate and measure more their aptitude and ability to communicate effectively. Job seekers are looking for roles based on their lifestyle choices. So many people adjusted their lifestyles during the pandemic. And because of that, they want a role that's hybrid, or they want a role that's remote. I will say that many people are realizing now at 3 years in of working remote that maybe remote's not right for them, and they want to get back in an environment where they can have some touch points with people, and they can see people in the break room, and they can, communicate in the hallway or take the drive to work to sort of create that mental separation. But most candidates and talent out there are still looking for a hybrid role or a fully remote role. There's ways, around engagement that companies have to really try a little harder on the engagement front when you move to a remote first culture. Candidates are looking based on their daycare schedule, or the fact that they don't have to pay as much daycare if they work in the office and have, maybe someone, even a relative, come while they're working at home on Tuesday and Thursday to sit with their kids. So it's really all about lifestyle. This great resignation that kicked in the latter part of 2020 has been focused around, people making lifestyle changes. Experience and engagement is critical for job seekers. So their ability to be engaged through the process, even if they've interviewed 10 times, I think we have to somehow give them that push so that 11th interview, they're still interviewing like it's their first time. They're fully engaged and present in that process, and not, they're simple things, right? And I think through the pandemic, because we are working from home, some people might have the TV on, or, little things like that will impact their ability to be fully engaged in the interview process. Companies also, though, have to be really engaged in the process to acquire the right talent, because some talent will walk away and say, that person wasn't paying attention to me in the interview, I'm going to go work for X company. So we all have to pay attention. And then leveraging the experience versus the training talent. It's interesting because as companies look at that build, buy, bridge, borrow model, you're also looking at, do we pay premium for someone that has experience? And you'll have to determine, those companies will have to determine what roles they'll pay a premium for, and what roles there will be a combination of training and experience, and then what roles there'll be no experience required, and they'll fully train them on the roles. And then leveraging internal talent is key for companies right now, especially from a budget perspective, but also from an internal knowledge perspective. The expectations of job seekers is flexibility. Even if they are 100% in person, if it's a role that's healthcare or retail or something, in a space where they're caring for children, so they have to be in person. Flexibility is key, and just being as human as possible as leaders to give them that chance to step away if they need to. Compensation is key. I think we have to put our foot down and say, we're only going to X and go to X. And if you can't get that person, now I wouldn't lose someone over $5,000 because it's not worth it to start the process in terms of the cost of hire. Especially for mid-level roles. But that connection, has to be there for job seekers. That's what they're looking for, they're after. And so as hiring leaders and companies, I think making that connection is key. I put this funny meme over here. The job description says, must have experience, reason for not getting hired, overqualified. So the market is just giving mixed signals these days, but we do have to, realize that as the hiring authorities, but also help coach our talent on that as they go through the interview process. And the one thing, if I were coaching a candidate, the one thing I would say to them is, the days of saying, I have 20 years of experience, I have 25 years, I have 15 years of experience in information technology, let's say, or marketing. To say I'm an experienced marketing professional comes off a little bit smoother. So it doesn't make you seem, like you can't, we have to help them not communicate in a way that makes it seem overqualified, right? So those are some tips that we can give some job seekers as we're coaching them. So what's ahead for 2023? I think some of the same things we're experiencing this year, at least for the first 6 months or so. The future is hybrid. It's on-site, it's remote, it's hybrid part-time and full-time, it's flexible. That's not really going anywhere. Most companies are settling on a hybrid model or a remote first model. If that opportunity, presents itself, of course, for hotels and healthcare and retail and tourism type positions, we can't be remote. We have to be there. So the talent shortage will persist in most markets. The gap between candidate skills and employer requirements will unfortunately also still exist. That's a big piece of, people saying, oh, no one wants to work. Well, actually, people want to work. Unfortunately, the employer requirements or what they're looking for is holding some people back. So I think pulling back on that, even as it relates to looking at your background check requirements and your drug screen requirements, we want to almost wipe the slate clean, create a whiteboard and start all over. Now, if your talent has to work with children or something, I understand that you have to hold those standards true, but otherwise, we can get creative around that kind of stuff. The other piece is many companies are getting to know their source of hire mix. So if they feel like they spent X amount of money on Indeed or LinkedIn, if it's a professional role, or even Career Builder or Craigslist for that matter, jobs are everywhere. And I think for job seekers to try the full mix is very important to see what is sticking for them and what helps. Also, clearly, foot traffic into places to get jobs as well. So that's what's ahead for 2023. I'm open to answer any questions you might have, or look at other ways that we can connect. I'm grateful for this opportunity to share with you. They gave me 20 minutes today to get off my presentation, and I think we're complete. My contact information is over here to the left, and then I'll let Daniela lead with questions.
Thanks so much, Teela. You gave us so much to think about, so I'm sure everyone is just processing. So we'll kind of get some questions started. Everyone, please feel free if y'all got follow-up questions, make sure to enter them in the chat or the Q&A. And I know Teela and Samir are going to be here to answer questions. So keep them coming. But Teela, I was curious, here I work for the Georgia Chamber, and, so we represent small, medium, and large size businesses. I was curious if you're seeing different kinds of trends for small businesses, large businesses, medium. I know that everyone's having a hard time hiring, but in terms of how these companies are grappling with these challenges, are you seeing differences?
The challenges are the same. The scope of the challenge is different. The impact of the challenge is different. So on a small company that's not able to find 2 or 3 roles, that impacts their revenue straight away. So we are seeing that there are specific TA challenges around the smaller companies don't have the brand, right, of a Delta or a Home Depot or a larger company. So they have to do more selling in their process. I think that's been the most critical aspect of it, is people want to connect with whoever their manager or leader is, no matter what the size company is. But small companies are having the challenge because they don't have as many resources as the larger companies. And so using and leveraging tools like, I think about a local Atlanta-based company, homegrown, Indeed is a way to find talent. Also, though, going out to, maybe you have a strategy of partnering with a program that's out there like a Year Up or something like that to find talent. But again, that's more of a you'll have to train that talent when they come in, but it will be worth it. And they'll stay with you, whether it's for 2 years or longer. So I think for the smaller companies, it's hard to get those partnerships with the big schools. So you kind of have to go after more of the schools that maybe no one's thinking about. Maybe they're not getting as many calls for talent, and just go about the process a little bit different, but it is the same. The challenge is definitely the same.
Yeah, and that's certainly what we're hearing from our small businesses, is that they're having the same, they're not hiring 500 people, but I think to your point, those 1 or 2 people are making a huge difference in terms of what they're able to do. So I think that's such helpful insights. We've got a question from Nate about employee turnover, and what you're seeing companies do to, keep engaging their talent, retaining folks. What's keeping people from participating in turnover and making sure they're staying within their company? What works?
Interestingly enough, what I've heard more from people that have decided to stay with their companies is they want to feel challenged. They want to be recognized, but also they want to be connected to their colleagues. So people that have friendships at work, that have a real connection with their manager or leader, that manager or leader is going out of the way to tell them when they do a good job. I think the days of the performance evaluation at quarterly or twice a year or once a year, depending on how your company does it, are over. We have to reinforce daily. We have to provide performance feedback daily so that they can get better in their roles. And I think the more that we can, there's a fine line between upsetting someone by providing them feedback. So you'd have to find the right timing. But yeah, it's the engagement piece is critical, and making that employee feel like they matter, making that employee feel like understand the impact of their role. So how does their role contribute to the revenue of the company? I know that's strange, but you do it all hands as a CEO. You could share those things with those employees to keep them. I will say though, if they're a free agent in their mind or they've quiet quit, it's with the new terminology, quiet quitting, they're going to go. And if they leave you for money alone, then you probably didn't want them to stay. I know that sounds strange, but you probably didn't want them to stay anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you want people that'll buy into the culture, just like, of your organization, and want to be there for success. Mm-hmm. We've got another question about, what do you anticipate in terms of like mid 2023? Do you see, and I know that's hard to think about, especially with there's so many kind of global factors that are unknown, but, we're thinking about summer jobs, maybe, how do you expect this maybe to change starting Q2 as opposed to where we are now?
I do believe, and the research shows that at mid 2023, we will start leveling. So the demand and the supply equation will pull back. And I think it'll mostly be on the demand side, right? So the demand will pull back a bit. Companies will start really, instead of in 2020, people were just tossing out jobs and saying, I need to hire a this, and they got it. Woo, you win. But those days, I think we're going to start pulling back the reins, and the market will level out a little bit. I also believe there'll be more opportunity for more that inexperienced talent or talent that doesn't meet the qualifications fully. I believe by then we would have gone through this long enough where companies will see the aptitude and ability in someone, or the fact that they are capable of doing the job, even though they need more hands-on training. And I think the time that companies have to hire won't have such an urgency. So the processes, unfortunately, when it's not challenging like it is now, the processes will start stretching out a little bit longer. And at that point, we'll know that there's a change in the market happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we've heard from a lot of our member companies that, they're lowering a lot of their qualifications for employment because, they can't find folks. When they do, they're able to get a larger pool, but they're having to do a lot more of that onboarding work. So it kind of slows you down in terms of actually meeting your needs. So I think, elongating those pipelines, figuring out what works. But we've seen too, most of our companies, or not most of them, a lot of them have shared that they're starting to think about hiring fewer people. They're kind of slowing down those practices. And so they're evaluating what demand is too. And I think, the R word that none of us are saying out loud is, it's kind of something that everyone's trying to evaluate to see what's real in terms of what does it do to demand on your business. So I think that's really helpful as we're thinking about these big trends that we can't really control, but we're certainly impacted by. We've got a question from Melissa about what are some resources that you recommend to attract underserved communities, maybe folks that don't have access to all these great resources, aren't sure where to start. And I think that's too maybe a great place for a lot of our providers at Max to kind of plug in. But what would you recommend for kind of reaching underserved communities and then maybe assisting some of our providers that do work with folks that may not have kind of everything that they need? What do you recommend for those folks?
Yeah, I've worked with Dana over at Atlanta Self-Sufficiency to do some, give back work with her and her team, and they're incredible. I think partnering with organizations like that where they have access, they're providing the tools so that those individuals can go to work. I've also volunteered with the Atlanta Mission, and I think looking at those opportunities to get people back on their feet that have made the commitment to themselves, right? They've gone through a program, they've committed themselves to this process. I think that's so key and keeping in mind that underserved doesn't mean they didn't once have access, right? So perhaps it's someone like me or you, right, that fell on a hard time and suddenly they're out and they're in this underserved community and they've been out of work through the pandemic, or maybe they picked up a habit and they cleaned that up. I think we have to just look at the individuals different, look at those circumstances different, but also meet them where they are. So figure out where are those, who has access to that group of people, and partner with those organizations to then help look for ways to be able to bring them into opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just because you're not there right now doesn't mean you're fully capable of contributing fully to the workforce. And I think the more we can get people from underemployed to fully employed, the better it is for those individuals and the better it is for our state as a whole. We want to increase prosperity. We've got a comment too from Nikisha about working with Boys and Girls Club and everything that they're doing to help youth develop those soft skills, be better prepared. What do you recommend too, as we're thinking about kind of that next generation of talent, or K-12 folks, how can we make sure that we're equipping those students with these kinds of skills now? I think it is a generation maybe that's better at self-promotion than previous generations, whether it's Instagram or TikTok or whatever else. But what do you think kind of what we should be thinking about for our K-12 learners?
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like although they're clearly they have high technical aptitude, right? This group of talent or kids that are coming up through school. My daughter's K through, she is a 12th grader. But thinking about that group, the one thing that they don't have as much, because if they don't have an example in their home, they don't really know what the capabilities are. So I'm finding that many of them are lost and they don't really know what they want to be when they grow up or what they want to do when they grow up. Like seriously, when they start getting to 7th, 8th, 9th grade, exposing them to opportunities. Like you could have a career in the grocery store industry, or you can have a career in retail. I have but I think helping them in that K through 12 time period, understand there are more careers besides doctor, lawyer, because those are careers that take a ton of education, time, and money. And they may not have access to those. So I think it's exposing them to more opportunities that are out there, and not pegging them in one box to say you have to go to college and you have to go be a lawyer or you're not going to make it in life. It's frankly a duty on many of us as employers, but also as parents, when our kids are at home, to be able to expose them to other careers where they can have success and not make it all about the money.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that's something that we've looked at a lot at the chamber. And I think to your point, that information gap is huge. So having college and career counselors that are there to help them figure out what's your best match and fit school. Maybe you do want to go directly into the workforce. Maybe it's a technical college certificate. I think too, we see so many of our skilled trades like plumbing, electrical,
yes,
extremely high salaries, a lot of flexibility in your work. It doesn't require as much, education on the front end, but you have great earning potential and really some flexibility. But we really see that, and especially too, a lot of our high demand careers, cybersecurity.
Yes.
I don't have anyone in my family in cybersecurity, but I know it's a great field and great opportunities for people. So I think, absolutely, if we can get more kids exposed especially to our high demand fields that are newer.
And there, there's programs out there in the summer. You can, as a parent or as a school administrator or guidance counselor, to funnel them to those programs to say, hey, this program will pick you up. You can go learn how to be a plumber, or you can learn how to install pools, or whatever that is. Or you can learn how to be an engineer. I was in an engineering program. Now I didn't become an engineer, but I was in an engineering program when I was in high school, and I think it helped tremendously. It helped me understand I didn't want to be an engineer.
Absolutely. I think knowing what you don't want to do is just as valuable as knowing what you do. You can start Xing things off the list. And, I think absolutely we've got so many opportunities. And too, when you're thinking about what you do from a systems perspective of how do you fill talent, a lot of those same kind of things from an engineering perspective, but just maybe not quite as much math and science, which I think I'm happy for. That's a specifically chose Fields not to do that. Teela, I know, again, tons in flux, but again, kind of for, companies and for organizations working with job seekers, how do you know best to kind of how to counsel clients as they're moving through this unpredictable, companies are hiring tons of people, not hiring tons of people, maybe you actually are going to stick to those certifications you put in the job posting. Maybe you're going to budge a little bit. What do you kind of recommend for a lot of like max providers that are working with clients directly and say, this is what you should do as you're looking through this kind of unpredictable job market when there are so many things that are kind of changing?
Yeah, there is a lot that's changing. And I think, again, that whiteboard effect of just erasing the whiteboard and saying, not pulling out the same for companies, right? Don't pull out the same job description from 10 years ago and just put it out there and hold to those requirements. Honestly, if the job description was written 5 years ago, I think we have to step back and look at it and go, do we still have these? Are these all required? Do we need all of these to get the right person? And if we get all of these, where do we pay for that? So we are looking at different methods. I think for the talent that's looking at opportunities, they really do hold to that. If you say 7 years of experience, they're going, oh, I'm not going to apply because I'm not even qualified. And then the person that's at 12 years will go, oh, I definitely have 7, I'll apply. So it's different all around in terms of how we will approach the job market, how processes are moving. The one thing that we're coaching the companies we work with, and the talent, we work with talent too, clearly, but the companies we work with, we're asking them, how can we refine the requirements for the role? Also, what are the nice to haves? What defines success at 90 days? That to me is where you get to the hardcore information of what is required. Because if someone's in the role for 180 days, what would define you? That will help you determine what are the real requirements and what's not really required. The other piece for talent that's looking at opportunities to tell them, please apply. If it says 4 years of experience and you have 3, go for it. Don't not apply to that role, because you could be the sharpest person in the stack. And again, just even the mindset around thinking about years of experience versus the amount of experience they've acquired over time, not the years, but just the projects they've worked on, the complexity of that may make 2 years look like 4, for some companies. So again, it's just that rethinking everything, but also the process has to be efficient without extra steps. We really have to think through that on the front end. And I think, especially as we think about new roles, when when companies are adding new roles or candidates interviewing for a new role, you can even help the company, refine that process. If you have, if they want to coach or share more about how they can impact the process too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great advice. And I know we've had a lot of companies too that are thinking about, maybe even reaching out to certain talent pools that they hadn't, and saying, yes, we'd love to do more second chance hiring. We'd like to, work specifically with groups that are coming in, on visas. I know there are refugees from Afghanistan that relocated that are very highly skilled. And so I think, thinking in that DEI perspective, being more inclusive and thinking about what do we really need to have and kind of what defines success. I was so grateful though that you mentioned, how people are looking for jobs and reaching jobs. We got some information from the Department of Labor, I guess over the summer, and it was really funny that they asked, where job seekers are looking for information and then where employers are advertising. And I think like 70% of employers were like advertising via a billboard. And then like 12% of employer or people were looking at a billboard to find a job. So it's one of those things, I think when you talk about the executive disconnect of seeing where people are looking and then, where people are advertising, it was so interesting to see that. But I was curious too, I know you mentioned the job boards are really helpful and then kind of the innovations with posting in the newspaper, which is an old school way. But are you kind of still seeing that disconnect in terms of how you reach folks, or are we starting to kind of level out there?
I think we're leveling out, but I still don't think we're meeting executive expectations, I will call it. So there's just not as many job seekers in the market because of our low unemployment rate. So because of that, I think if we spend money on an Indeed or a billboard for that matter, the return is going to be less in general, or maybe half of what it was before the pandemic, because people don't have to look anymore. People come to them and say, hey, it goes back to that recruiting is outbound now for companies. So people are going to approach the talent and say, hey, here's this opportunity. Would you like to be considered for that role? But there's, to answer the question, there's definitely a disconnect with where companies are still not leveraging their internal referral programs and not making that a priority. So someone, a colleague or someone in your company refers talent for a role, even if you look at their resume and you go, this person's not qualified, still call them, make it a priority to call them, because they may actually be a fit if you listen to their background and hear more about what they've done. I think it goes back to the boxes we've built around ourselves. So if the title for the job is systems analyst and their title was business analyst, and you go, oh, they're not a systems analyst. Well, they could be, call them, because everyone, every company calls roles, explains roles differently, gives titles to roles differently. So we just have to think a little bit more outside of the box than usual.
Yeah. And I think your approach of, thinking of not immediately scratching people off, but really thinking of, being more inclusive and thinking of that way, I think is so helpful. I was curious though, if you're seeing specific trends in specific industries. I know healthcare is an outlier that we continue to see too. We just don't have enough healthcare professionals. We didn't before the pandemic, and we certainly don't now. But are there other industries that are experiencing more challenges than others, either because it's high turnover, or do you see it too, if it's not industry, do you see like a skill level, like if you're more of a middle skill worker, you're having issues with retention and turnover, kind of what's going on in that space?
So the most competitive landscape that we're seeing right now is at that mid-level. And the way that we define mid-level in our firm is anywhere between that, 30,000 to 75,000, let's just call it. That space is extremely competitive. And the one thing I would recommend is, especially if you're a company looking for that talent, or if you're someone coaching that talent, to go online and just do a quick Google job search and say, business analyst job or financial analyst job, and see how many of those jobs are open in your area. That honestly will give you an idea of how quickly you need to move, how competitive it is in your market, but also keeping in mind that maybe 40% of the roles that are open in that space aren't even posted anywhere, because maybe they're partnering with an agency or a search firm to find that talent. So it's extremely competitive out there. I think just finding the roles, finding the talent is much harder for all of us, but that mid-level is a bear right now. It really is. Those candidates are getting 2-3 offers at a time, and you're having, to make a decision, am I going to compete or not? And in most cases, you have to hop in there and compete.
It sounds like, trying to sell your house, it's the same thing. Everybody wants those houses. But yeah, it's I think, and we too are so fortunate in Georgia to have such a strong economy, and so many new companies are locating here, which we're really grateful for. But if we see those huge new jobs in the state, it also means that we've got some competition between existing industry and all of our new industries that are coming to Georgia, which we're again grateful for. But it certainly makes the labor market a little bit tighter.
Well, one thing I want to address too is just the competition between private sector and nonprofit. Nonprofit is now in the mix. It used to be that sort of nonprofit jobs sat over here and the rest of the job market sat over here. Well, nonprofit companies are having greater challenges because now they're competing with private sector. Like private sector is hopping in a nonprofit and saying, we can pay talent, at the midpoint of our range. They're not used to getting a bonus. So then we add a bonus, for some nonprofits, we add a bonus in there, and they're getting pulled, companies are pulling from that sector now and seeing it as a right market for talent, whereas before it sort of sat in its own space. So that's something to address too, is nonprofits sort of reevaluating compensation. Clearly, you're not in it for a profit necessarily, and you're in it for the good, but you are in a space where you're being pulled to compete just alongside these private sector companies, but without the resources that they have. So that's a big challenge too.
Yeah, and absolutely. Why do you think that some of our private companies are kind of looking at that nonprofit space? Is it because we're seeing a greater demand for CSR and sustainability within companies? What's the shift been?
Well, I think it's the behavior of those employees too. So historically in nonprofits, they're longer tenure companies, right? So people stay with those companies longer. They go to work for, Boys and Girls Club or a Metro Atlanta Chamber even, and they stay there for 15 years. That's what we hear. That's what we've known forever. And now we're in a place where private sector's looking at that and going, hey, if they stayed there for 10 or 15 years and we can train them to move over to this sector, maybe they'll have more longevity here too. So it's a strange thing where they're almost like more loyal in that industry. And that's what private sector is looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like, to your point, a lot of those folks believe in the mission of the organization. They believe in the mission of Boys and Girls Club. They're invested. They see the greater purpose of what they're delivering to kids every day, and what they're delivering, to the community as a whole. And so you're invested in that purpose. And I think as we're seeing that be a bigger feature in what employees are looking for in their work, I think that's such an interesting shift, but really cool to watch.
Yeah.
So we've got one more question I've seen, and certainly if you've got questions for Teela or Samira, put them in the chat as we're winding down. But we've got one question. It's, do you expect the hiring practices described today to go back to previous thinking? Or, is this kind of where we are now? I guess kind of what's the new normal, and how long do you expect this new normal to be there? And, when do you think companies might kind of go back more into the driver's seat? Or are we kind of going to be in an, potential employee driven market for a little bit more?
So I have two ways of answering that. And one is, I think that we will continue to see the market the way it is. I also feel like we are in a new normal that is our normal. So the term new normal is over. We're now in normal. This is normal, right? So we all have to make that shift of, this is not the new normal. This is normal for us. The second side of that, though, is that I do believe there will be a shift and employers will get back into the driver's seat. It may not happen, though, until 2024. I think we're in this car and on this ride for at least another 9 months, 9 to 12 months. So we won't see a major shift, unfortunately, until that time. And even when we do see that shift, behaviors would have changed at that point, where candidates will have higher expectations and candidates will be used to operating in this sense that they're in right now. So it will take a lot longer for the behaviors to shift, even after the market actually shifts, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all keep saying, well, once COVID's over, and, people still get different things. So I think this is where we are. We're all maybe coming to grips with the fact that this is the new normal, and where we're going to be for a little bit, moving forward. It's I think we've all said that COVID was a transformative event. We're probably all sick of saying it, but I think that's the reality. And we're so grateful for you, Teela, and your expertise to help walk us through this and think about what this means for our companies, for job seekers, for Max providers. We're so grateful for your expertise this morning. And Samira, thank you for everything that you do with SHRM. This has been so helpful. I know I've gotten so many comments in the chat too about how helpful this has been. So just again, want to thank you both for being with us.
My pleasure.
We're going to round out with just a few more announcements, so bear with us. So kind of just looking forward to events. We've got our annual meeting. I know we did this virtually last year. We're really excited to have another annual meeting. It's going to be Thursday, December 8th, 8:30 at Google. So if you've got information, I know Joy will send out lots of details about this, but we'd love to have you with us for our annual meeting. It'll be our second annual, so really excited. And then we've got our final Max Minutes of the year in December. Looking forward to the 2023 legislative session. Lots of things changing, lots of new leadership in the House, Senate, and we've got 53 new legislators under the Gold Dome in both the House and Senate. So all new things. Really excited to talk with some experts and think about what we've got in terms of moving forward. But just to round us out, we are in our renewal drive for Max. So if you're not a member, we'd love for you to join. You can see kind of all of the different benefits that are here listed in terms of what you receive from being a Max member. But please, if you're not a Max member, we'd love for you to join. I know Joy can answer any questions about all the benefits and why it's such a huge value for you. And then if you are a member, we want you to renew. We want you to make sure that you're continuing to receive all the benefits that you've gotten accustomed to and you've gotten used to, and make sure you're able to maximize your investment with Max. Again, thanks to our anchor investors. We're so grateful to have so many companies that have invested in organizations in the Metro Atlanta area to develop a strong workforce. And then again, just want to say thank you to Teela and Samira, SHRM-Atlanta. We're so grateful for y'all's expertise. Give everyone just a minute or two back on your Friday, but hope you have a great weekend and a great start to the holiday season. So with that, we're adjourned.